If we were to ask the question, what is the purpose of the education system? We would be greeted with incredulous stares. Got to be a trick question, right? But suppose we were to ask this question: what is the purpose of education? They look and sound very similar, but they are fundamentally different. Here's why. The purpose of the education system is to produce obedient drones, worker bees who have no ambition, ability, or even desire to do much else but join the rat race, swallow what they're fed, and above all, don't ask questions, especially when it comes to what they are spoon-fed by their betters. Sheep who will blindly follow their masters and walk right into their assigned pen or a cattle car without questioning why. Moreover, I would submit to the world that the dumbing down of the victims of the government school monopoly is strategic. It is deliberate. You are taught to be smart enough to build a quality widget down at the factory, but not how to think for yourself, never enough to be a self-sufficient, free-thinking individual capable of seeing through the smog of lies and deception put out by politicians and their boot-licking, servile toadies in the mainstream media who resent the little people looking over their shoulder. The system was designed by elitists for the benefit of the elitist ruling class. They do not trust you. Their term for you and I is the toiling masses, bitter clingers, and a basket of deplorables. They have other terms, but this is a family show. The founders of this country had a whole different idea in mind. Their term for us is we the people. While they did not introduce the concept of popular sovereignty, they were determined to run with it with a vigor that was unmatched in centuries of human experience. But they understood fully that it all hinged on an educated, aware, and involved populace. The modern American education system is for the most part a relic of the late 1800s. The need for workers in the Industrial Revolution was met by the schools. It is basically a linear progression that goes something like this. Go to school, get a good job, work for the company for 40 years, retire with a gold watch and a pat on the back, a heave-ho and a out the door. If you want to really get a good job, you go to college. Many will spend the best 40 years of their life working a job they hate, trying to impress people they don't know with money they don't have for reasons they can't explain. When I was younger, it was called keeping up with the Joneses. It is also known as the rat race. It is the system of debt and credit that keeps you in a perpetual state of running as fast as you possibly can to make that next car payment. The advertisers constantly feed you the message that you want and need the new and shiny thing. The banks and credit card companies make it possible for you to have the new and shiny thing. Your neighbors already have the new and shiny thing. Hundreds of years ago, Solomon wrote, "The borrower is slave to the lender." Nothing has changed. But here's your participation trophy, Skippy. The occupants of the corner offices on Madison Avenue in corporate America, and the owners of the businesses that you helped to build their dream, thank you. It's not all bad. The system has produced a standard of living that could not have been imagined just a couple of hundred years ago. The poorest of the poor in America has material possessions today that the wealthy of yesterday could not hope to possess. I am a very vocal critic of the rat race, but we must acknowledge that it has raised the standard of living for the vast majority of people worldwide. The purpose of true education, on the other hand, should be to teach people to think for themselves, to question the status quo, and always ask, is this true? The real mission of education should always be, first and foremost, to help an individual grow into adulthood equipped to find his purpose in life, pursue that purpose, and accomplish it. Period. Life is so short. The older you get, and thus the closer you get to the end of it, the more you realize the true value of things. It is said, and it is true, you will never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. There's no one who values a complete education any more than I do. You should be taught the math and science needed to be an innovative and productive member of the widget building cast. If this is what you wish to do with your life, and you are happy with it, then you should be the best widget builder the world has ever seen. There's nothing wrong with that. And certainly nothing for anyone to look down on. One of the biggest factors in alcoholism and drug abuse is when people are in something they hate and they see no escape. A rut is simply a grave with the ends kicked out. The most basic building block of real education is the ability to read. So, is it a mere coincidence that phonics is so rarely taught in school? I think not. If a student does not learn to read early on, he is at a severe disadvantage in his entire effort to gain an education. If an individual can read, and if he or she has a thirst for knowledge, they can educate themselves to almost any height they wish. If not corrected, and they don't learn to read, they can soon become totally overwhelmed and lose interest in school altogether. When that happens, it is probably inevitable that drugs, alcohol, and a whole train of self-destructive behaviors are set in motion. Look around you if you need proof. When kids learn to read using the look and guess method, it is in spite of it, not because of it. Is it a coincidence that on the slave plantations, two of the worst crimes against the master were running away, freedom, and learning to read, empowering the individual? Gee, not much has changed. One of the great tragedies of what we have devolved into with the assembly line approach of factory schooling is the idea that the cookie cutter tests that are used to make sure that no child is left behind actually leaves many children on the side of the road with no clue as to what bus to even get on. When we promote the idea that there is only one way of looking at intelligence, and by George, if you don't measure up, then you're just stupid, we commit a crime against useful humanity. Why? To begin with, there are several arenas of intelligence, at least 8. Say what? Let's look at just some of the different forms of intelligence and the type of people who exhibit them. Consider linguistic intelligence, word smart, anyone who speaks or writes for a living. Logical, mathematical intelligence, number, reasoning smart, an accountant maybe, a chemist, a computer geek. Number 3, spatial intelligence, picture smart, an architect, an artist, a painter. Number 4, kinesthetic intelligence, body smart, an athlete, soldier, personal trainer. Musical intelligence, musician, singer, songwriter. 6, interpersonal intelligence, people smart, coach, teacher, salesman. Number 7, intrapersonal intelligence, self-smart, entrepreneur, philosopher, writer. And 8, naturalist intelligence, nature smart, animal trainer, a botanist, a veterinarian. This was a very short list of the types of people who have a large dose of these various intelligences, and obviously most people have more than one. For example, usually people who are mathematical brainiacs are also very good in the field of science and so on. The overarching point is, it is a travesty committed against young students to pigeonhole them into a category, usually a negative one, based on one-size-fits-all test dreamed up by a bunch of useless bureaucrats. We would all do well to remember that Albert Einstein was considered not all that bright by some of his teachers. Yeah, let that one soak in. More often than not, a child who is viewed by their teachers as not very bright is simply a square peg who is being hammered into a round hole with less than optimal results. So, what does constitute a good education? I would say one that is well-rounded. Math, science, English, history, civics, but not stopping there. We must teach future citizens how to think, not what to think. A person who does not have a moral education does not have a true education, period. A person with no moral compass is the most dangerous animal on the planet. Students should also be taught things like goal setting, personal development, leadership skills, critical thinking, just to name a few. A person's position on the issue is usually a reflection of their answer to my pet question: who works for who? Does the government work for the people, or do the people work for the government? Our founding fathers chose the model of popular sovereignty for our government. That is, we the people are the ones that the government is supposed to serve. Obviously, few in D.C. these days ever got that memo. But that is how it's supposed to work. That was the revolutionary in the Revolutionary War. From the beginning of humanity, the concept that the government works for the people, not the other way around, was almost unheard of. This model can only work when the populace has been given a well-rounded, complete education. And now we can see why it is so important to the elites to maintain their iron grip on the, quote, education system, unquote, to perpetuate the ignorance of history, civics, and critical thinking. Without that, recent events of a half a world away would have the entire country in the streets demanding that political heads roll. One of my favorite quotes of all time is this jewel by William F. Buckley. I believe that the duel between Christianity and atheism is the most important in the world. I further believe that the struggle between individualism and collectivism is the same struggle reproduced on a different level. Bam! Nailed it. Collectivism and all its evil spawn, socialism, communism, fascism, modern liberalism, take your pick, can only survive in a petri dish of ignorance, an ignorance of history, civics, and world events so pervasive that it must be inculcated starting in the first grade.